My brother proposed to my fiancée in front of me, and she told him she loved him too, but only if he did this one specific thing for her. Growing up, my brother Clyde was allowed to treat me like trash and get away with it. He'd kick me off the top of the bunk bed and still get dessert at dinner, and I'd have to apologize for making him mad. Things only got worse the older he got. He'd wave a kitchen knife in my face if I looked at him wrong, and Mom would excuse it as Clyde just joking. I was 13 when he broke my nose for the third time. We were in school, meaning the teachers saw how unprovoked it was, and my parents couldn't excuse it again. The teacher called them in to let them know they'd be suspending Clyde, which should have been good news, but it wasn't. I knew what would happen. Sure enough, when we got home, my mom dragged me into my room with a thick leather belt in her hand. I couldn't sit down for 3 days straight. My parents made me stay home while the bruises healed and forced me to do Clyde's suspension school work while he got to go to the cinema and play video games. By high school, I'd long realized I would always stay the family's punching bag, so I resorted to just staying quiet. Well, even that wouldn't work. Clyde would deliberately provoke me by poking me, flicking me, even spitting on me until I gave him a reaction. And the second I did, it was grounds to hit me. Mom had told me so many times that him hitting me was self-defense that I didn't even bother going to her anymore. I was just counting down the days until I turned 18. The day I did, I left home with a note taped to the fridge and waited for their call that never came. The first few years were weird, not having to walk on eggshells, and then I met Yvette. She was gentle and kind, everything my family wasn't. I ended up reconnecting with my parents shortly after we got engaged, hoping things would be different now. I showed them a picture of me and Yvette during our first dinner together in 4 years, and the second Clyde saw the picture, he snapped. He flipped his plate getting spaghetti sauce on Mom, then started freaking out and called me a psycho for dating his ex. Apparently, he and Yvette had dated a few years ago. It only lasted about 2 weeks before she caught him using Tinder at a restaurant with her. I told him there was no way he was serious, and he went to say something, but for once, Mom actually cut him off. She gave him this look as if she was implying something, and Clyde instantly flipped his act. He sat back down and said I was right. Their relationship meant nothing. He even toasted to me and Yvette and said he hoped we could rebuild our relationship. It seemed strange, but my inner child who craved family approval ate it up. I left that day feeling almost optimistic. Things stayed silent for about 2 months, and that's when the dinner invitation for me and Yvette came. Clyde said it was to celebrate us. I should have known something was up. When me and Yvette arrived, Clyde greeted her with a hug that lasted slightly too long, wearing a tank top to show off that he'd recently gotten into working out. Well, about 30 minutes into awkward dinner small talk, Clyde clinked his glass. He stood up and launched into this big speech about finding happiness and knowing what you want in life. At first, we thought it was a toast about us, until he dropped to one knee in front of Yvette. My eyes went wide. Yvette's did too. Mom was the only one who didn't look surprised. She actually pulled out a camera. Clyde then pulled out a plastic ring from a cereal box and asked Yvette to marry him. Before she could even say no, he started jamming the ring onto her finger. She pulled her hand away and told him to stop, but he wouldn't. He yanked her hand toward him, and that's when I snapped. I stood up and socked Clyde on the side of his face as hard as I could. He dropped like a sack of potatoes, and Mom started screaming about her baby. Me and Yvette left before Mom could even start to argue. We blocked everyone and officially uninvited them from the wedding. Unfortunately, it wasn't so easy. Just 4 days later, Mom showed up at our door. She was here alone and demanded we re-invite Clyde. We stared speechless as she called his proposal a harmless prank. Of course, we argued back, and the argument escalated to aggressive shouting very fast. At some point, Yvette tried leaving the room for the bathroom to compose herself, but Mom didn't let her. She followed her, screaming about family destruction, and when Yvette reached for the door handle, Mom completely lost control. She grabbed Yvette's hair unprompted and yanked her down hard. Yvette's head hit the floor. Mom dropped down, hitting her face and clawing at her eyes. Yvette started screaming help, and I immediately rushed over. I literally grabbed Mom and yanked her off by her hair before backhanding her across her face and physically tossing her outside and locking the door. She stayed outside screaming until I threatened to call the cops. When I went to check on Yvette, I was horrified. She had scratches down her cheek and a bruised scalp. I got her some ice, some water, and took care of her for the rest of the night. The next morning, I was researching lawyers and restraining orders when Yvette walked in smiling strangely. She told me she'd just called Clyde. My face went pale, but before I could ask her why, she said it. She called Clyde and told him about what Mom did. When I asked why, she said it's because she also told Clyde that he was the one she wanted all along. I was just a means to get to him. But now, because of Mom getting violent, she doesn't feel safe. She said she specifically asked Clyde to teach Mom not to do that again. My eyes went wide. We both knew that could only mean one thing. Part of me was anxious at first, but when I really thought about it, I realized just how insanely badass Yvette's plan was. And sure enough, just 2 days later, the hospital called me. Mom had been admitted with a broken orbital bone, cracked ribs, and a severe concussion. I rushed to the hospital, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Yvette sat beside me, that same strange smile playing on her lips. When we arrived, Clyde was already there in the waiting room, pacing back and forth like some concerned son. The moment he saw us, his face shifted into this practiced look of worry. "She's in surgery," he said, his voice dripping with fake emotion. He moved closer to Yvette, completely ignoring me. "Thank you for calling me. I knew something like this would happen if she kept pushing." I watched him reach for Yvette's hand, but she pulled back slightly. He didn't seem to notice, too busy playing his role. A nurse walked by and he immediately flagged her down, asking about Mom's condition in this loud, theatrical voice, making sure everyone could hear what a devoted son he was. The waiting room had maybe a dozen people, all watching this performance. Clyde kept glancing at them, making sure they saw him wringing his hands, saw the tears he was forcing out. He even pulled out his phone to call Dad, speaking just loud enough for everyone to hear about how he'd tried to protect Mom from her own temper. Yvette squeezed my hand 3 times, our signal. I looked down at her phone screen where she'd typed out a message. I recorded our call. He confessed everything. My heart started racing. She had evidence, actual proof of what Clyde had done. But before I could process this, 2 Two security guards approached us. They looked directly at me, their faces stern. "Sir, we need to speak with you," the taller one said. Clyde stepped forward, putting on his concerned brother act. "Officers, I called you. My brother here threatened our mother yesterday. I have the texts right here." He held up Mom's phone, showing them something on the screen. I felt my stomach drop. "That's not possible. I haven't texted Mom since you threatened to hurt her if she came near your fiancé again," Clyde interrupted, his voice perfectly calibrated to sound heartbroken. "I saw the messages when I picked up her phone from the house. She was so scared she couldn't even delete them." The security guards moved closer. One of them had his hand near his radio, probably ready to call the actual police. Yvette stepped between us, her voice calm but firm. "Those texts are fake. I have a recording of Clyde admitting he attacked his mother." She pulled out her phone, quickly navigating to the audio file. Clyde's face went pale for just a second before his mask slipped back on. The recording started playing, his voice clear through the speaker. "She had it coming, trying to mess with what's mine. I'll make Mom pay for touching." In one swift motion, Clyde lunged forward and grabbed Yvette's phone. Before anyone could react, he'd thrown it to the ground and stomped on it with his heel. The screen shattered, pieces of glass scattering across the hospital floor. "She doctored that," he shouted, his voice cracking with fake emotion. "She's trying to frame me because she's obsessed. First she dates my brother to get close to me. Now this?" Mom's eyes fluttered open just as the phone crunched under his foot. She made a weak sound, her hand reaching out. Clyde immediately rushed to her gurney, grabbing her hand and stroking her hair. "It's okay, Mom. I'm here. I won't let them hurt you anymore." He looked back at the security guards. "See? She's distressed by their presence. They need to leave." A nurse in purple scrubs pushed through the crowd that had gathered. "What's going on here? This patient needs immediate surgery for a brain bleed. Everyone needs to clear out now." The doors to the ER burst open and two police officers walked in. Real cops this time, not just hospital security. The first officer looked familiar, and then it clicked. I'd seen him at the gym with Clyde just last week. They were workout buddies. "We got a call about a disturbance," the officer said, but he was looking right at Clyde, not at the mess of phone parts on the floor. Clyde immediately launched into his story, his voice breaking at just the right moments. He showed them photos on his phone, a bruise on his jaw from where I'd punched him at dinner. He talked about my history of violence, how I'd abandoned the family for years, how I'd recently become aggressive and unstable. The officer, Jenkins, according to his badge, nodded along like he'd heard this all before, because he probably had. Clyde had been setting this up for weeks, maybe months. "My brother needs help," Clyde said, and actually managed to squeeze out a tear. "I've been trying to protect our parents, but he's getting worse. And now with Mom in the hospital." Through the glass doors of the waiting room, I saw Dad's car pull into the parking lot. He sat there for a moment, phone pressed to his ear, clearly getting instructions from someone, probably Clyde. After a minute, he drove away without even coming inside. Yvette leaned close to me and whispered, "The recording's backed up to the cloud, and I have dashcam footage from my car. It shows him going into your mom's house at 2:47 p.m. Her voice was steady, but I could feel her trembling slightly. The timestamp shows he was there for 3 hours. Officer Jenkins separated us for questioning. He took Clyde to one corner, me to another, and had his partner talk to Yvette. I watched Clyde gesturing animatedly, pointing at me, shaking his head sadly, playing the part of the concerned brother perfectly. When Jenkins came back to me, his mind was clearly already made up. "Your brother says you've been harassing your mother, says you've made threats. Those texts are fake. He has her phone. He could have sent them himself. Without your mother's statement, we can't determine what happened at her house, but I'm going to need you to stay away from her while she's here, for everyone's safety." Clyde smiled from across the room, not his fake concerned smile, but a real one, quick and sharp, just for me. He knew Mom would never turn on him. Even lying in a hospital bed with injuries he gave her, she'd protect him, just like always. They wheeled Mom away for emergency surgery, Clyde following as far as they'd let him, still playing the devoted son. The other people in the waiting room whispered among themselves, shooting me dark looks. In their eyes, I was the violent brother who'd threatened his poor mother, while my caring sibling tried to protect her. As we left the hospital, I saw Clyde through the window. He was talking to a group of nurses, his hands moving expressively, no doubt spinning more lies about his dangerous brother, building his narrative, poisoning the well. Outside, Dad's car was back in the parking lot. This time he got out, but he stayed by his vehicle, not approaching us. When we made eye contact, he looked away. Yvette tried to wave him over, but he shook his head and mouthed something that looked like "not now." "He showed Dad something," Yvette said quietly. "Probably more fake texts." We got back in the car, and I noticed my hands were shaking now. Everything was happening so fast. This morning I'd been looking up lawyers, and now Clyde had the police on his side. The hospital staff turned against me, and Mom in surgery because of injuries he'd inflicted. "The cloud backup," I said suddenly. "You still have it?" Yvette pulled out her laptop from her bag, already checking. She logged into her cloud storage, navigating to the audio files. Her face fell. "It's corrupted. The file's here, but it cuts out right before his full confession." Of course it did. Nothing could ever be easy when it came to Clyde. He'd always been 3 steps ahead, even as kids. Every time I thought I'd found a way to prove what he was doing, he'd already prepared a counter-move. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake, my best friend since college. "Hey man, your brother called me a few weeks ago, said he was worried about you. I didn't think much of it then, but now he's saying you're having some kind of breakdown. What's going on?" The pieces clicked into place. Clyde hadn't just started this campaign today, or even this week. He'd been laying groundwork for months, reaching out to my friends, expressing concern about my mental state, poisoning relationships I'd built outside the family. Another text, this one from my boss. "Need to see you first thing Monday. HR will be present." Yvette saw my face. "What is it?" I showed her the messages. She closed her eyes, understanding immediately. Clyde was systematically destroying my life, and he was doing it while playing the victim. "We need to be smarter," she said finally. "He's been playing this game his whole life. We've only just started." She looked at me with that same strange smile from this morning. "But I learned a lot during those 2 weeks we dated. More than he thinks." I studied her face, seeing something there I hadn't noticed before. A hardness, a calculation. She'd played Clyde perfectly with that phone call, getting him to confess, getting him to attack Mom. But we'd underestimated his ability to control the narrative afterward. "What do we do?" I asked. "We play his game," she said simply, "but better." As we drove away from the hospital, Meanwhile, I saw Clyde's gym buddies arriving in the parking lot. 3 of them, all looking around like they were searching for someone. For me, probably. More witnesses to whatever story Clyde was about to tell them. The war had started, and I was already losing. But looking at Yvette, at the determination in her eyes, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting Clyde alone. And maybe, just maybe, that would make all the difference. We drove home in silence, both of us planning our next moves. The little boy who'd been kicked off bunk beds and blamed for it was gone. It was time to learn how to fight like Clyde fought, dirty, smart, and without mercy. Because if there was one thing I'd learned growing up in that house, it was that sometimes the only way to hit a monster is to become one yourself. Yvette spent the rest of the drive home typing furiously on her laptop, cross-referencing timestamps and pulling up old messages. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Clyde's truck following us. The apartment building's parking garage felt darker than usual as we pulled in. Inside our apartment, Yvette immediately started printing documents while I double-checked the locks. She'd found something in Mom's old social media posts, a photo from last month showing bruises on her wrist, captioned, "Clumsy me." The metadata showed it was taken the same day Mom had called me crying about Dad being mean to her. I dismissed it then as her usual manipulation. Now I wondered. My phone rang. Jake's name flashed on the screen. I answered, putting it on speaker so Yvette could hear. Jake's voice was strained. He told me Clyde had offered him $5,000 to sign a statement about my mental instability. When Jake refused, Clyde mentioned knowing about Jake's recent DUI that he'd kept quiet. The threat was clear. Cooperate or face exposure. After hanging up, I slumped on the couch. Clyde wasn't just attacking me directly. He was targeting everyone around me. Yvette sat beside me, her hand on my knee. She showed me her laptop screen. She'd been digging into Clyde's social media connections. His gym buddy, Officer Jenkins, appeared in dozens of photos dating back 2 years. They weren't just workout partners. They'd vacationed together, attended each other's family events. The doorbell rang. We froze. Through the peephole, I saw our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, holding a casserole dish. I opened the door cautiously. Mrs. Chen's usual warm smile was gone. She thrust the dish at me, explaining her grandson had been playing in the hallway when that nice young man stopped to chat. Clyde had told the child I was dangerous, that he should run if he ever saw me alone. The boy was terrified now, wouldn't even come near our door. She asked us to consider moving out for everyone's comfort. After she left, I found myself pacing. Yvette pulled me back to the couch, reminding me that reactive anger was exactly what Clyde wanted. We needed to be strategic. She'd already started creating a timeline of Clyde's abuse, using old photos I'd kept hidden in a shoebox. Pictures of bruises, hospital records from my broken noses, even a recording I'd made at 15 of Mom screaming at me while Clyde laughed in the background. But none of it would matter if people believed Clyde's current narrative. We needed to flip the script somehow. Yvette suggested we start with Mom's church friend Helen, who'd always been kind to me as a kid. If anyone might have noticed Mom's fear of Clyde, it would be her. That evening, Yvette drove to Helen's house alone while I stayed home, knowing my presence might complicate things. I spent the time going through our apartment, looking for anything Clyde might have planted during our absence. Under our bed, I found a small recording device. My blood ran cold. How long had it been there? What had he heard? I destroyed the device and kept searching. In the bathroom vent, another one. Behind the kitchen microwave, a third. My hands shook as I realized Clyde had been listening to our most private moments for who knows how long. Every conversation about him, every plan we'd made, he'd heard it all. Yvette returned looking troubled. Helen had been polite but distant. She'd mentioned that Clyde had visited last week, concerned about his brother's deteriorating mental state. He'd shown Helen printouts of angry emails I'd supposedly sent him. Emails I'd never written. Helen believed them. Why wouldn't she? Clyde had always been the charming one. We spent the night creating our own documentation. Yvette used her design skills to create a website chronicling my abuse, using the photos and recordings we had. We bought a domain name and prepared to go public. If Clyde wanted to control the narrative, we'd create our own. The next morning brought the HR meeting I'd been dreading. My boss, Sandra, sat across from me with a representative from Human Resources. They had received an anonymous complaint about my workplace violence history. The complaint included photos of Clyde's bruised jaw and claims that I'd threatened coworkers. It was all lies, but the company had to investigate. They placed me on administrative leave pending investigation. 2 weeks paid, they said, as if that softened the blow. I cleaned out my desk while coworkers avoided eye contact. The security guard who escorted me out mentioned that my brother had seemed real worried when he'd stopped by yesterday. Of course, Clyde had been there in person, cementing his story. Back home, I found Yvette on the phone with someone named Marissa. She hung up quickly when I entered, but not before I heard her say something about the same pattern. When I asked, she admitted she'd tracked down Clyde's ex-girlfriend from before her, the one he'd dated for 6 months. Marissa was scared to talk, but had agreed to meet Yvette tomorrow at a coffee shop downtown. That afternoon, we drove past my parents' house. I don't know why. Maybe just to see if anything looked different. Clyde's truck was in the driveway. Through the living room window, I could see him sitting with Dad, both of them looking at something on Clyde's phone. Dad was nodding, his face grave. Another ally lost to Clyde's manipulation. Our landlord called that evening. There had been concerns raised about us. Multiple neighbors had complained after Clyde's visits to the building. The landlord suggested we might be happier somewhere else. When I pressed, he admitted Clyde had shown him the police report from the hospital, painting me as unstable and dangerous. We had 30 days to vacate. Yvette tried to cheer me up by cooking my favorite meal, but I could barely eat. Everything was falling apart exactly as Clyde had planned. My job, my home, my friendships. He was systematically destroying it all. And Mom was still in the hospital, unable or unwilling to tell the truth about who had really hurt her. We went to bed early, emotionally exhausted. Around midnight, Yvette's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A photo of her car in our parking garage, taken just minutes ago. Clyde was here, watching us. We called building security, but by the time they checked, he was gone. Of course he was. He'd made his point. We weren't safe anywhere. The next morning, Yvette met with Marissa while I stayed home, afraid my presence might spook her. I spent the time applying for jobs online, knowing my references were now poisoned. Every application application felt futile. Who would hire someone under investigation for workplace violence? Yvette returned with disturbing news. Marissa had bruises she didn't remember getting during her relationship with Clyde. Blackout periods where she'd wake up sore and confused. Clyde had convinced her she was drinking too much, that the injuries were her own fault. The relationship ended when she woke up in the hospital with a concussion, Clyde by her side playing the concerned boyfriend. She'd never questioned his version of events until now. We decided to visit Mom at the hospital, hoping she was coherent enough to talk. The reception desk had my photo with a red flag next to it. I was on the restricted visitor list. Only Clyde could see her. We sat in the parking lot, watching through the windows as Clyde arrived for his daily performance. He brought flowers, making sure every nurse saw what a devoted son he was. That evening, Dad finally returned Yvette's calls. His voice was cold, distant. He told us Clyde had shown him years of concerning emails and texts from me. Threats, rants, signs of mental illness. All fabricated, but Dad believed them. Why wouldn't he? The evidence was right there on the screen. He suggested I get professional help before someone got seriously hurt. The website we'd created started getting traffic, but the comments were brutal. People accused me of lying, of trying to destroy my family out of jealousy. Someone had screenshotted the site and shared it in local Facebook groups with warnings about the dangerous man spreading lies about his innocent brother. Clyde's network was mobilizing against us. 3 days into my administrative leave, Jake called again. He'd decided to sign Clyde's statement, not because he believed it, but because Clyde had escalated his threats. Photos of Jake's young daughter at school had been sent to his phone. The message was clear: cooperate or risk something worse. I couldn't blame Jake. He had to protect his family. Yvette discovered that Clyde had power of attorney over Mom's medical decisions, signed just last month during her mental health struggles. The paperwork was all legal, properly notarized. It meant Clyde controlled what treatment she received, who could visit her, even whether she could be questioned by authorities about her injuries. We tried reaching out to a lawyer, but the consultation fee alone would eat into our savings. The lawyer we did speak to briefly said that without Mom's testimony or concrete evidence, we had no case. Clyde's recording device discoveries meant he probably had audio of us planning to manipulate him. We'd played right into his hands. The apartment felt smaller each day. We'd found 2 more recording devices hidden in places we'd never think to look. How many more were there? Were there cameras too? We started communicating through written notes, paranoid about what Clyde might be hearing. A week after the hospital incident, Yvette's dashcam footage mysteriously corrupted. The cloud backup she'd mentioned, also gone. Clyde had somehow accessed her accounts or had help from someone who could. Every piece of evidence we thought we had was disappearing. Mom's condition improved enough for her to leave intensive care, but she developed complications, an infection that kept her hospitalized. Clyde posted daily updates on social media about her progress, always mentioning the stress that had contributed to her condition. The implication was clear. I was responsible for Mom's suffering. Our 30-day notice loomed. We started looking for new apartments, but every application required references, employment verification, credit checks that would reveal my current administrative leave. Clyde had thought of everything. We were being systematically cornered. One evening, while taking out the trash, I noticed Clyde's truck parked across the street. He was just sitting there, watching our building. When he saw me notice him, he smiled and waved like we were old friends. Then he drove away, slowly, making sure I saw him circle the block before disappearing. Yvette tried to stay strong, but I could see the strain wearing on her. She jumped at every noise, checked the locks constantly. Her design clients started pulling back after someone sent them anonymous emails about her association with a dangerous individual. Her income, which had been keeping us afloat, began to dry up. 2 weeks into my leave, HR called. The investigation was complete. While they couldn't prove the allegations, the disruption to the workplace meant they were terminating my employment. They'd mail my final check. Don't come back to the office. I sat in our living room, staring at the wall, feeling the walls of Clyde's trap closing in. That night, we made a decision. We couldn't win playing defense. Clyde had too much momentum, too many pieces already in place. If we were going to survive this, we needed to go on the offensive. But that meant crossing lines I'd never wanted to cross. It meant becoming the monster Clyde was already painting me as. Yvette pulled out a notebook where she'd been tracking Clyde's routines. Gym every morning at 6. Coffee at the same shop afterward. Lunch with Mom at the hospital. Evening workouts 3 times a week. He was predictable, comfortable in his victory. That would be his mistake. We started with his gym. I knew his locker combination. He'd used the same one since high school. While he was in the shower, I slipped in and photographed everything in his gym bag. His phone was there, unlocked. I had minutes at most. My hands shook as I scrolled through his messages, taking pictures with my own phone. What I found made my stomach turn. Conversations with multiple people about my deteriorating mental state. Fabricated emails he'd created. Payment confirmations to people who'd agreed to support his narrative. But buried deeper were other things. Messages to women that crossed boundaries. Photos taken without consent. Evidence of the real Clyde hiding beneath his perfect son facade. I barely made it out before he returned. My heart pounded as I walked past him in the parking lot. He didn't even notice me, too busy texting someone about meeting later. I'd gotten what we needed, but using it would mean declaring total war. There would be no coming back from this. At home, Yvette and I reviewed what I'd found. She pointed out patterns in his messages, connections we hadn't seen before. Clyde wasn't just destroying my life for fun. He was protecting something. There were references to the incident from 3 years ago, payment records that didn't make sense, a name that kept coming up, Rebecca Chen. We researched Rebecca Chen. Social media showed she'd been a graduate student who'd dated Clyde briefly. Then she'd disappeared from online entirely 3 years ago. Her LinkedIn still showed her as pursuing graduate studies, but there were no updates, no activity. It was like she'd vanished. Yvette suggested we were getting too deep, that maybe we should just leave town and start over, but I couldn't. Not anymore. This wasn't just about me. Clyde had hurt others, would keep hurting others. Mom was still in the hospital, still under his control. If we ran, who would be next? We decided to track down Rebecca Chen. It took days of searching, but we found an address for her parents in a town 2 hours away. We drove there on a cloudy Tuesday, not sure what we'd find. The house was modest, well kept. Rebecca's Rebecca's mother answered the door. When we mentioned Clyde's name, her face went pale. She invited us in reluctantly. Over tea, she told us Rebecca had been in a psychiatric facility for the past 3 years. After dating Clyde, she'd had a complete breakdown. She'd made accusations about him that no one believed. The stress of being disbelieved, of being painted as crazy, had actually driven her to attempt suicide. She survived, but never fully recovered. Rebecca's mother showed us letters her daughter had written from the facility, rambling at times, but with moments of clarity where she described what Clyde had done. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the way he'd made her question her own reality until she couldn't trust her own mind anymore. It was exactly what he was doing to me. We drove home in heavy silence. In the parking garage, Clyde's truck was in our usual spot. He'd left a note on our windshield. "Hope you enjoyed your trip. Say hi to Rebecca for me." He'd been following us. Of course he had. He wanted us to know he was always watching. Inside, our apartment door was unlocked. Nothing was missing, but everything had been moved slightly. Pictures reframed. Furniture shifted inches from where it had been. Clyde's way of showing he could enter whenever he wanted. That we had no sanctuary from him. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? My brother moved my furniture? He'd already established me as unstable. This would just feed into his narrative. We were trapped in a game where he'd written all the rules. That night, unable to sleep, I made a decision that would haunt me. I created fake social media accounts and started spreading the photos I'd found on Clyde's phone. The inappropriate ones. The ones that showed who he really was. If he wanted to destroy my reputation, I'd return the favor. Within hours, the posts were gaining traction. People who'd supported Clyde started asking questions. Some of the women in the photos came forward, confirming they'd never consented to being photographed. The narrative began to shift slightly. Clyde, the devoted son, suddenly had cracks in his facade, but I'd miscalculated. The next morning, police arrived at our door with a warrant. Clyde had reported a break-in at his gym, thousands of dollars in equipment damaged. Security footage had mysteriously malfunctioned, but witnesses placed me there. The photos on my phone from his gym bag were evidence I'd been there illegally. They arrested me in front of our neighbors, who watched from doorways and windows. Clyde had won again. As they led me away in handcuffs, I saw him standing by his truck in the visitor parking. He gave me a small salute, then turned to comfort Yvette, playing the concerned brother-in-law. At the station, they processed me like a common criminal. Fingerprints, mugshot, the whole humiliating process. My lawyer, a public defender who looked overwhelmed, advised me to plead guilty to lesser charges, take a deal, avoid trial, but I couldn't. Not when Clyde was still out there, still in control. Yvette bailed me out using the last of our savings. She looked exhausted, defeated. In the car, she told me Clyde had visited while I was being processed. He'd offered to help, to make the charges go away if we just left town. Never came back, never contacted the family again. It was tempting, so tempting. But then she showed me something else. While I'd been in jail, she'd gotten a call from another woman, someone who'd seen the photos I'd posted and recognized Clyde's pattern. She wanted to meet, to share her story. There were others out there, others he'd hurt. We weren't alone anymore. We met Sarah at a diner outside town. She was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. She told us about dating Clyde 5 years ago. The charm that turned to control, the gaslighting that made her question reality. The final night when she'd woken up in the hospital with injuries she couldn't remember getting. Clyde by her side, explaining how she'd fallen down the stairs. She'd never reported it. Who would believe her? Clyde was so convincing, so charming. She'd moved away, started over, tried to forget, but seeing those photos had brought it all back. She still had medical records, photos of her injuries, evidence that corroborated a pattern. We were building a case, but it was dangerous. Clyde had eyes everywhere. Our phones were probably compromised. Our apartment definitely was. We started meeting supporters in random locations, communicating through encrypted apps, building our network carefully. But for every step forward, Clyde pushed us 2 steps back. My arrest record was public now. The charges pending. No employer would touch me. Our eviction date approached with nowhere to go. Mom remained in the hospital, Clyde controlling all access to her. One night, exhausted and desperate, I suggested we take his deal, leave town, start over, let him win. Yvette looked at me with disappointment that cut deep. She reminded me of Rebecca in her psychiatric facility, of Sarah still looking over her shoulder 5 years later, of all the future victims if we gave up now. She was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone Clyde had hurt and would hurt. We couldn't run. We had to fight, even if it destroyed us in the process, even if we became the monsters he'd painted us as, because sometimes that's what it takes to stop a real monster. The war with Clyde was escalating, and we were running out of moves, but we weren't running out of determination. Not yet. The little boy who'd been kicked off bunk beds was gone. In his place stood someone harder, someone willing to fight as dirty as necessary, someone who understood that with monsters like Clyde, conventional weapons weren't enough. We spent that night planning our next move, knowing it would either expose Clyde for what he was or destroy us completely. There was no middle ground left, no safe retreat, only forward into whatever darkness awaited. The next morning, I woke to find Yvette already dressed, packing documents into a folder. She'd arranged a meeting with Mom's doctor while Clyde would be at his morning gym session. We had maybe an hour window. At the hospital, we convinced the doctor to review Mom's injuries more carefully. He pulled up her scans, pointing to patterns that didn't match a simple fall. The orbital fracture showed a fist-sized impact point, multiple defensive wounds on her arms. He'd been suspicious, but hadn't wanted to interfere in family matters. I asked him to document everything, create an official report questioning the injury patterns. He hesitated, mentioning Clyde's power of attorney, but Yvette showed him Rebecca Chen's medical records from 3 years ago. Same injury patterns, same hospital. The doctor's face changed. While he typed up his report, my phone buzzed. A photo from Clyde, him standing outside our apartment door with our eviction notice. 24 hours to vacate, not 30 days. He'd convinced the landlord we were dangerous. We rushed back to pack essentials. In the bedroom, I found Yvette had already started. She'd also discovered something else. A letter from Mom hidden in an old cookbook Clyde had brought when he'd broken in. Mom's shaky handwriting detailed years of Clyde's violence toward her, dated just 2 weeks ago. She'd been planning to give it to someone, but never got the chance. The letter mentioned other victims, names, dates, hospitals. Mom had been keeping track, maybe planning her own escape, but Clyde Clyde must have found out. That's why he'd attacked her. Not because of Yvette's call, but because Mom was finally going to expose him. We photographed every page before Yvette noticed something odd. The last page wasn't Mom's handwriting. It was Clyde's, adding a final paragraph about how Mom's mental decline made her write delusional things. He'd been planning to use her own evidence against her. Sarah called while we were packing. She'd found 2 more women willing to talk. They were meeting tonight at a motel outside the city. One of them, Catherine, had security footage from her apartment showing Clyde breaking in after their breakup. She'd been too scared to use it before. We loaded our car, knowing Clyde would be watching. Sure enough, his truck appeared in our rearview mirror as we left, but instead of following us to the motel, we drove to the police station. Not to report him, that hadn't worked. We went to post bail for someone else. 3 days earlier, a man named Marcus had been arrested for assault. I'd found his case while researching at the library. Marcus had attacked someone who'd been stalking his sister. That someone was Clyde. The police report mentioned the sister's name, Rebecca Chen. Marcus was Rebecca's brother. He'd spent 3 years watching his sister deteriorate in that facility, knowing who was responsible but unable to prove it. When he'd seen Clyde at a bar last week, something snapped. Now Marcus faced serious charges while Clyde walked free. We posted his bail using the emergency fund we'd been saving for a new apartment. When Marcus walked out, his eyes were hollow but grateful. He had his own evidence, recordings of Clyde bragging about Rebecca while hammered, thinking Marcus was just another gym buddy. That evening, 7 of us gathered in that motel room. Me, Yvette, Sarah, Catherine, Marcus, and 2 others, Victoria and Jonah. Each woman had dated Clyde at different times over the past decade. Each had similar stories, similar injuries, similar gaslighting. But Catherine had something more. She worked in IT and had recovered deleted files from an old laptop Clyde had given her. Among them were videos. Clyde had recorded himself with these women without their knowledge. The implications made everyone sick. We spent hours organizing evidence, creating timelines, backing everything up to multiple clouds under anonymous accounts. Yvette designed a website that couldn't be traced to any of us. We weren't just fighting back anymore. We were building an airtight case. Marcus revealed that Clyde had done this to at least 12 women that he knew of. Some had moved away. Some, like his sister, had broken completely. One had died in a suspicious accident 5 years ago. The police had ruled it sewer's lied, but her family never believed it. Around midnight, Clyde texted me. He knew where we were. He'd been tracking my phone somehow. The message was simple. Last chance. Leave town or I release everything. We realized he meant the recordings from our apartment. Whatever he'd captured could be edited, manipulated, used against us. But we were past caring. Victoria, the oldest of Clyde's victims, made the decision for all of us. She uploaded everything to the website and hit publish. Within an hour, the site had hundreds of views. Local Facebook groups that had vilified me were now sharing our evidence. The videos were especially damning. Clyde couldn't claim they were doctored when his face was clear in every frame. By morning, 3 more women had come forward, then 5, then a dozen. The hospital doctor who'd examined Mom called to say he'd submitted his report to the authorities, along with patterns he'd noticed in other patients over the years. All women, all with connections to Clyde. Clyde tried to control the narrative one last time. He went live on social media from Mom's hospital room, claiming we were orchestrating a witch hunt against him. But Mom, still weak but finally coherent, did something unexpected. She looked directly at the camera and said one word: liar. The live stream cut off immediately, but thousands had seen it. Mom's single word carried more weight than all our evidence combined. The Golden Son's own mother had finally called him what he was. Officer Jenkins arrived at the motel with 2 other cops, but instead of arresting us, he placed his badge and GN on the table. He couldn't be part of protecting Clyde anymore. He'd seen our evidence, remembered things Clyde had said at the gym, comments about women that Jenkins had dismissed as locker room talk. The district attorney's office called that afternoon. With multiple victims, video evidence, and Mom's testimony, they had enough to bring charges. Serious charges. Clyde was arrested at his gym, surrounded by the buddies who'd protected him for so long. They all stepped aside as the handcuffs clicked. But Clyde had one last card to play. From jail, he had his lawyer release the recordings from our apartment. Hours of private conversations, edited to make me sound unhinged and violent. In one, taken out of context, I'd said I wanted to hurt him for what he'd done. The damage to my reputation was instant and severe. We spent the next weeks in a legal battle on multiple fronts. Criminal charges against Clyde, civil lawsuits from his victims, my own charges from the gym break-in. The recordings made everything complicated. Some people believed they proved Clyde's point about me being dangerous. Mom was released from the hospital but refused to go home. Dad, finally understanding the monster he'd enabled, filed for divorce and moved in with his brother. The family home sat empty, a monument to decades of abuse and enablement. During Clyde's trial, detail after detail emerged. The woman who died 5 years ago, Clyde had been the last person to see her alive. Rebecca Chen's breakdown, triggered by months of psychological torture. Each woman's story built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern. But the trial also revealed my own actions. Breaking into the gym, spreading the photos, planning with Yvette to manipulate Clyde. The prosecutor argued I was a victim pushed to extremes. The defense painted me as equally guilty. The jury struggled with the complexity. In the end, Clyde was convicted on multiple counts, but not all. Some charges stuck: assault, harassment, illegal recording. Others didn't. He got 7 years, eligible for parole in 4. It felt like both victory and defeat. My own charges were reduced to misdemeanors, community service and probation, a criminal record that would follow me forever, but no jail time. The judge acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances, but couldn't fully excuse my choices. The civil lawsuits would take years to resolve. Most of us would never see real compensation.